I want to talk about the Lumix S5 Mark II. I picked one up after we had our whole discussion about the GH7 and why that was in my cart and then out of my cart. I had it pre-ordered and then didn't go through with it just because the price to value was not there.
I didn't catch that you actually purchased
Yes.
the full frame. So
Yeah, because I've been struggling with the G9 Mark II. Not that it's a bad camera or that there's any problem with it. In fact, it works great most of the time. But the overheating thing is always in the back of my mind.
Yeah.
Of like, I don't want to have
and
to
you've
worry
taken
about
some preventative measures. I don't know if you've discussed it,
that. I haven't.
but do you want to talk about what you've done to the camera? Because it does look like a stormtrooper at this point.
It does, yes. So I found a company called Cam Skins that sells, but they're basically stickers that you can kind of wrap. Like they're not vinyl.
Like, I mean, cars have wraps, cameras have
you can
wraps.
wrap, and it's very tedious work because every little piece, every little bit of geometry needs to be covered. So they'll send you basically a printed, cut out. I mean, it's one step above like printer stickers.
Right. Yeah.
So they do hold up so far, but I wrapped the G9 Mark II in all white to hopefully sort of mitigate any heat absorption because that's when it struggles the most is outside in direct sunlight. I also have that Ulanzi fan that I've shown you, which clips right to the back behind this LCD, and that does actually make the biggest difference. So that works quite well.
Well, it's surprising how much just like the back LCD really heats up the camera.
Even on the Sonys, because we have the same issue on the A7 Mark IV. It was overheating. We're like, we have one in one part of the room that's fine, and one in the other part of the room that's overheating.
Right.
Going, what's going on? The temperature in this room is like 72 degrees. It's not that hot. Fahrenheit, not Celsius.
Yeah.
And it was the fact that just one of the Sonys had the screen flipped in. The moment we opened the screen, camera was fine.
Yeah, it was fine. Yeah. Granted, we weren't recording onto a memory card internally. It was being recorded over HDMI.
In standby. Yeah. It's like, and that's why those Sonys frustrate me the most because they're the most susceptible to the overheating from just the LCD being closed. Just open it up, gives it some airflow, gives it enough. With the G9 Mark II, most of the time it's fine. It's in those situations where I'm running HDMI, I'm kind of pushing the features, and I'm outside and it's absorbing some extra sunlight and gets a little too hot. So I use that Ulanzi fan. But I wanted to avoid that. That's why I was looking at the GH7 is like, this has the fan built in, but I ended up going with the S5 Mark II.
It is interesting, just, I mean, talking about like white cameras. Sony recently has been launching cameras in white. And I don't know if that's to differentiate them just in general, but it may have something to do with potential overheating issues.
At this point, I would pick a white camera, I think. With the way that they're building modern cameras, all these companies. The G9 Mark II, they say it's completely weather sealed. So they don't want any ports exposed. No exhaust fan, nothing. You can't get, even though it's the exact same body as the S5 Mark II, literally the exact same.
Yeah.
The S5 Mark II has vents on the top, kind of on the EVF, and on the G9, those are sealed up. There's nothing there. And so I find it incredibly frustrating. I would rather have it's not going to overheat unless it's extreme scenarios. I would rather have the fans than a little bit better sealing.
Yeah. It's interesting because even like the Sony camera, the A7 IV, the issue we had with the overheating, and the screen itself, you can only really tilt it up if you have it completely like swung out. So even on like the GH6, for instance, has the ability just to tilt out in general. Like even that alone would prevent the camera from really feeling a lot of that excess heat. But it is surprising that camera manufacturers don't implement like just like that little thing. It's like, just get it a little away from the body just to prevent that heat from going back to the camera. But
yeah, and with the G9 Mark II, I think there's literally no way for the camera itself to vent any heat at all. So to me, that's a compromise.
But it still works. You found
it does.
a
it
way
works great.
for it to work now.
Indoors, totally fine. Outside,
because I would imagine nowadays, because it's currently in like the 118s, 115s in Arizona, and you've been using that camera outside, probably not at that extreme
No, not
heat.
the peaks. Like in the morning where it's like
So
100 maybe.
100?
Yeah,
Oh,
anywhere from
no.
like 90 to 100, where the
Okay.
morning kind of warms up.
But not direct sunlight. It's just temperature.
Correct.
Okay.
But you know, anytime you're moving around, it's going to catch a little bit of sunlight. You're not going to be perfectly shaded,
Yeah.
and I try and do my best. But anyway, that was the whole problem with the G9 Mark II. Just feeling like I don't want to have to think about this. I want to kind of run with something that I know has a fan built in,
Yeah.
and the S5 Mark II does. It's not as robust of a fan as on the GH7, but everything I've heard and seen online is good reports. And all the G9 Mark II really needs is a fan, just even a little one. And the S5 Mark II has that. So I went that route, which is kind of an interesting thing considering we've been shooting Micro Four Thirds primarily for so long. We've done some full frame work. We've done some Super 35, APS-C. We've used all the sensor sizes, but Micro Four Thirds has been my go-to for so long. That is kind of an interesting step away from that, going Lumix full frame.
Yeah. Well, have you noticed a difference in quality going, like, switching to full frame? Because a lot of the stuff that you've been doing is outside during the day. So it's not really like low light performance. That's not really what you're looking into.
No, low light has never been top for me. I know a lot of shooters do that. They're shooting at nighttime, or they're concert venues or weddings or something like that.
I would think it's just people with limited access to, like, lights, I would assume. Because whenever I hear people talking about low light, and I'm like, where are you filming? Like, you don't have light? Like, that's one of the key things you need to record video.
Yeah, even I found in the last like 10 years, just a modern city has enough ambient light that most cameras are fine. They don't struggle.
Yeah.
It's really when you're like, I'm going to go out to the middle of nowhere, into the middle of the desert,
Right.
and I want to film a cool scene of a cactus with some stars in it. You can do that, but it's so niche that to me, I do get the concert thing. I get weddings. If you are doing more photography and you want to crank your shutter speed up, reduce motion blur, all those things, but it's just not been at the forefront for me. Just like autofocus, where it's helpful. I'm glad it's there, but it's not something I've ever needed.
Right. Because even on, like, I don't know, more professional cameras where the base ISO is 800, a lot of times I'm pulling light away from my subject because there's too much light. So it is interesting when people try to go immediately to that one thing. It's like, oh, well, full frame better in low light. And I'm like, well, yeah, but like, how often are you actually using that second base ISO?
True. I will say it is cleaner, regardless of low light or not. Just that the characteristics of the sensor, because I'm looking at something like the G9 Mark II or the GH6 Micro Four Thirds cameras that are 25 megapixels, I'm pretty sure. S5 Mark II is full frame, also 25 megapixels. So same resolution, much larger sensor size.
Does that camera have a dual base ISO? Or what's the base ISO for that camera? And then possibly.
Well, so if you're shooting with a standard picture profile, you can go down to 100. I think the true base, or if you're in Vlog anyway, I'll just assume that's the true base. The lowest ISO is 640.
Oh, okay.
So it's even like a third of a stop more than
the
G9.
GH7?
Yeah, because that base is 500.
500,
yeah. So you're at that the mercy of the environment, the mercy of your conditions, where there's only so low you can go, and you start needing to rely on things like NDs, which is why I keep stressing that all these cameras should have some type of internal ND, because they keep pushing these ISOs to these higher and higher limits for cleaner, and I love it.
Yeah.
But then everything's always super bright, especially when you're using these things to their fullest, shooting with a shallow depth of field.
Yeah.
So your aperture is either, with the lens I have, I'm shooting at 2.8, but a lot of the full frame shooters, they want that like 1.8, 1.4, 1.2.
Yeah.
And for photography, you can always increase your shutter speed, but for video, you are stuck.
I was kind of joking. Like I was talking to one of our editor friends, and I was saying that I think the new trend is going to be no NDs. Like, I know how much you're saying, like, they're going to put NDs in cameras. I think they're just going to go completely away from NDs completely, because there's a lot of people, especially nowadays, obviously you're consuming a lot of content online, social media. And I remember coming across this post, and it was like an NBA videographer, and everything he posted is very like choppy because he's shooting at a very like high cranked shutter speed. Granted, he's slowing things down, but it's even past the amount that you'd want to have clean motion blur at whatever, frame rate. And his excuse at first was just like, nah, this is how I like it, right? It's just, no, it looks good that way, whatever. And then, reading down further into the comments, he's like, I didn't have my ND filters that day, all right? Like, I'll admit it. I didn't have them, whatever. But he went on, keep reading the comments because I love reading comments. I don't know. But he's just saying like, no, it looks clean. And like, you can't argue that aspect, right? Because if you're using super fast lenses, if you're using base ISOs that are 800, you're going to need some type of ND, right? And of course, it's going to have a little hue shift if you're not using one that's designed, by that lens manufacturer, by that camera manufacturer. So it is kind of interesting how people like are designing new filters. I don't know if you saw Polar Pro just came out with one. It was, oh man, who's that guy that looks like you? What was his name again?
Peter McKinnon?
Yeah,
yes,
Peter McKinnon.
I've seen the...
Yeah, it's
a
like
variable
a
ND,
VND polarizer,
CPL, and diffusion all in one, yeah.
Which it's cool, right? And it makes sense because, it's like people want all those features, but when you start stacking all these different filters by potentially different manufacturers, you're going to come out with an image that looks really strange, possibly vignetting, all these issues. So I think people are just going to be like, you know what? No more NDs. I'm just going to get the cleanest look through this glass. I'm going to crank my shutter. Who cares? Because it lives and dies within minutes.
Okay, we should place our bets because I see your point, and granted, to double down on that, there's people shooting social media with their iPhone, and there's no ND there. It's just whatever the camera does.
No one cares except for us.
No one knows.
Like,
no one cares.
The very few people who actually care. It's like we're getting to be that generation where it's just like, you're the old guy who's like, like you should be doing it the right way. I think that's what
now. But to counter that point, and I'll place my bets on the other side of the table, which is now more than ever, even my Osmo Pocket 3, $500 consumer level camera, has magnetic ND filters that you can either come with it or you can buy. I think they came with it. DJI, most of their drones have ND filters available, which is a consumer grade product as well. I think the ability to use NDs is becoming more commonplace, and I think if we have manufacturers start putting it in cameras, it will just be another setting, just like your aperture, just like your ISO.
I could see like an auto ND, like the electric. What do they call it?
Electronic ND, like they have on the FX6. Right?
I totally understand that. But what makes me think that they won't do that is because of the HDR features that they're putting into cameras, like the new DJI drone, like the Mavic Pro 4, I think, the latest one. So it's like the most, I don't think it's like the base level consumer camera, but it's further down. It's not like the Mavic Pro or anything, but it has an HDR feature, which is much like your phone. So do you even need NDs if the camera itself is going to compensate for you?
Well, when it comes to exposure, I mean, I don't know. Maybe there's theoretically some magic they can maneuver, but when it comes to motion blur, your eyes see motion blur. I can wave my hand.
Oh, for sure.
Like your eyes are seeing blur,
I agree,
just like that camera.
But I don't think people notice motion blur. You can see it.
You notice it when it's a subconscious effect. I think it's very similar to when they did The Hobbit at 48 frames.
Yes.
Higher frame rate, higher shutter, and people get this weird sense of like it's more jittery. It's more stuttery, and they can't put their finger on it. They don't know what they're describing. It's you're not seeing motion blur, and so it looks weird. It looks strange. Might be cool for sports.
I don't know if people know that anymore though, because we come from a generation where there was much less content, and it was almost like 50-50, right? It was like, this is good Hollywood level feature productions, and there was like like reality TV. But nowadays, it's primarily probably user generated content that people are getting fed. And you're getting it from an iPhone, which is just automatically picking a shutter, it's automatically picking an aperture, it's automatically doing everything. So I think people just don't know. We know, which I think is probably the problem, maybe.
Well, with a lot of the social media stuff that we do, that you'll shoot, you're lighting it, and even that makes a difference. People do see, they go, wow, this looks clean. This looks good. I appreciate the lighting.
It's a style. I would agree that it's a stylistic choice to do all these things, but I don't think people necessarily notice. But I think that's the least one to notice, I think, personally.
I think there's an interesting phenomenon. I don't know. We'll have to see how I may be wrong, but when we were coming up, there was professional and there's amateur, and bridging the gap between the two was very difficult because there wasn't really a pathway to earn significant revenue, to buy all the fancy equipment, to really invest in your skill set until you reached such a level that was like beyond what most people achieved. A lot of people would stay amateur. They'd be, prosumer even. And it was like, I bought this camcorder you know, and as long as it like looks good enough, sounds good enough, like I don't really need to worry about lighting. It's just, I'm here to film a corporate video. I'm here to do whatever. Nowadays, with social media, with YouTube, with influencers, everyone starts as amateur, of course.
Yeah.
But that revenue can come quick if you get followers, and which doesn't matter if you're amateur professional, by the way, right? You can get 1 million followers being an amateur. But then what happens? Oh, I've got some money in the bank account. Oh, maybe I should hire someone professional. Maybe I should take a class. Maybe I should invest and get a DSLR. Maybe I should. And so that ramp up, I think, happens earlier. And that's where I see a lot of content creators nowadays more professional than the so-called professionals who went to film school, who did it, you know, the tried and true, you know, classic way. But that the incentive to be good, to stand out, to have something high quality is more immediate nowadays to me. And you look at some of these, you know, like Peter McKinnon, for example, YouTuber, content creator, photographer. His stuff looks great. Yeah. Super professional. And granted, he is sort of, and it's a weird, but like the incentive is there for him to be the best or the greatest or any of the kind of filmmaker YouTubers, because that's what the audience expects.
That's what he's known for, yeah.
And then you go and there's you're rewarded for it.
I don't know, maybe nowadays I've seen the opposite with specifically social media influencers. I've seen like some like food reviewers on Instagram. They've tried to upgrade their like content and make it more high quality, and people in the comments are like, nope, go back. Like, go back to your iPhone. Like, this is weird. Yeah. Because they expect this like almost like a low quality,
the authenticity.
It's truly authentic. It's like, no, like I miss when you just were ranting like raw, like on your iPhone. Yeah. But now it's like, oh, shallow depth of field. Like they don't know these terms, but it's like, this isn't the same, you know, it's just not what we originally signed up for.
Yeah. I don't know if you can stop that though, because the desire to be better when those incentives are that strong.
If it's authentic, like if you know that person's like actively trying to be better with production, it is weird when they all of a sudden partner with somebody and then their level shoots up. I know you've done that for people before, like they've had businesses and they've wanted to like level up their content. Yeah, that's fine. And people have noticed. I've read comments from people like, oh my goodness, like what happened to your videos? Like they look, you know, amazing now, right? But
which is the difference of someone who's just happens to be probably, who would it be? You know, probably your marketing person for your company takes out their phone. They're like, we should do TikToks. We should do Instagram Reels. We should do, and you'll see some people are very clever. The recent trend, it's kind of died off, but the smash cut, like you'll see the fail about to happen and then it'll smash cut to like the burrito rolling across the table or like the water balloon popping or
like the very trendy edits
very
that are happening now.
That's, you know, the marketing works. It doesn't matter they're shot on an iPhone. But for something that's not a gimmick, something that's not a trend, if you need actual quality content week over week over week over week, there is something that lets you stand out just a little bit when you upgrade the quality from what anyone can do with their phone, because everyone can do that.
Well, I think that's the difference. It's like, are you upgrading quality just for quality's sake, or are you making like intentional changes to the way you're actually delivering content? So like for this example, for you, you were helping a gardener produce better content than they previously were, which was just, I think it was just shot on iPhone. It was just...
I think she got some kind of camera, but it's that diminishing returns where you're invested in the one thing. She's passionate about gardening. She's not interested in filming and editing and all that. Right. So at a certain point she reaches that where it's like, okay, I need someone else to do this.
Well, there's that.
And then she got the increase in quality as a side effect.
Yeah, but I'm talking about just the level of production where it's like, well, you're talking about a very specific thing. I'm going to show a close-up of that thing. Yeah. I'm just not going to upgrade you from 1080p to 4K, which is what a lot of like just general content creators like, oh, I got a new camera. It's like, okay, but like, did you get another lens that's going to allow you to show me something in more detail? That's what I'm more interested in. I'm not just here just to see you go into HD, you know, it's like...
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the reason I got the Lumix S5 Mark II, is a little bit of hedging against the future. Just having full frame allows you to have a few more options available. When we did that photo shoot a couple months ago, we shot all full frame Sony stuff just because it was for print, because, you know, trying to deliver the absolute best when something is printed versus most video someone's going to consume on their iPhone. So even in that consideration, Micro Four Thirds from Lumix, same ecosystem. The full frame is cleaner. The noise profile is not so what are they, for people
noticeable. I mean,
yeah,
for one,
you've described it as just like you just see texture.
Muddy. I don't know. Maybe not muddy, but it's not even grain. It's just like
texture.
Yeah, it's just texture.
Like you're seeing the sensor, you're seeing the pixels.
Yeah, even at the lowest ISO, you're just like something's there, and it's not grain. If it was film grain, it'd be like this is cool, but it's like it's not. It's just like mush almost.
Where if you're shooting full frame, those photo sites are cleaner, they're bigger, they're absorbing more light, and you see that side by side. Now, if it's shrunk to an iPhone, you won't notice it.
You're not going to notice on either.
For print, you do see it, and for video, you do see it when you're watching any kind of decent sized display. The other thing I'll say the benefits of full frame is what people already know. There is more dynamic range, not just in like, oh, I can shoot out a window and I can see, you know, the highlights, but just in the
fall off.
The fall off, right? The specular, the tones, you
roll off or whatever it is. But
that does look better.
Yeah.
And then of course the shallowness of the depth of field. So I got the 28 to 70 Sigma lens intentionally because it's a 2.8 constant aperture. I usually prefer that.
Yeah.
And it's pretty lightweight, small, compact, but still a full frame glass. There's some other options I was looking at. Sigma makes a 28 to 45. That's like a 1.8. So if you really wanted to push that shallow depth of field, you could. That lens is insanely expensive. It's very heavy. It's big. I opted for...
More for portraits, maybe, not necessarily.
It's kind of a weird lens. I wish it had a little more reach than 45. 28 to 45 is not enough for me when I'm doing the run and gun documentary style. But 28 to 70, I was like, I'll sacrifice a little bit of the wide end, save a little bit of money, have something lighter weight, easier to go with. And that has worked out okay. There's some moments I miss the ultra wide, but we were commenting on this too, where it's very rare that you see these ultra wide shots in anything that's like cinematic.
Yes. I mean, you could put bars on your screen to bring it back into that cinematic realm.
Put bars
like some like cinematic
letterbox it. But like
but yes, it's anything wider than like a 24 millimeter full frame.
Looks more YouTuber vloggy kind of thing, which is fine. Like I actually like that look. I feel like it's very even though it's so wide, it's very intimate to me because it feels I have to get close.
Yes.
And so as a viewer, I feel like I'm close.
Well, it's a good way. I think you might have sent this. I forget what director of photography was talking about how if you shoot at like a larger aperture, for instance, you're giving the audience more of an opportunity for them to look around, which I feel is a good opportunity, especially in like YouTube and like, let's say where you're shooting. It's like, well, I want you to be able to look at this space because it's very difficult for me to kind of establish something unless it's like a scripted narrative, right? It's like where tight shots are almost better because it's like, I want you to look at this. I want you to look at that. I'm telling you a story, pay attention. But in this YouTube realm of just, and the kind of content you're shooting is kind of just what's happening is happening. So you kind of want the audience to get lost in whatever it's like, we're in this location, check it out. But it's not as intentional as, like I said, like a very scripted story where you're trying to intentionally show close-ups of items. But, like even in The Boys, we were talking about how like a wide shot is shot with like a, longer focal length lens just across the street, It's like, okay, we're going to show this, but I'm going to be over there.
Everything's much more compressed. It's much more at a distance, which feels more cinematic, but it feels less authentic. And I've always tried to bridge those two. Like you're talking about the shutter speed and what people are consuming on social media. I like to find some of those aesthetics to tap into. So like wider shots, but more close up. So it feels kind of vloggy-ish, but still shot with a camera that has all the professional features, the dynamic range, the control over exposure. I will say, at the end of the day, the Lumix S5 Mark II is a great value because it's full frame at such an affordable price. I think you can find them now used for like $1,300, $1,400 US, which is a steal compared to some of these newer cameras. And the S5 Mark II does everything I need. However, the difference between Lumix full frame and Lumix Micro Four Thirds is something I think only the shooter, the person making the content, will notice. Once it crosses the finish line, as far as delivery, I don't think anyone could tell the difference. Especially, final note, I love that 10 to 25 Micro Four Thirds lens. It's a 1.7 Leica lens, the 25 to 50. There's great lenses. That 1.7, 10 to 25, compared to the 28 to 70 at a 2.8 on full frame is slightly shallower. but the difference is so negligible, and like those focal ranges are so similar that I feel like that's what you'd be shooting with probably anyway on full frame.
Yeah.
Because you're not going to find really faster than that zoom lenses that are all that useful. At least I haven't found them. I think Canon might make did they make a 24-70 that's an f2?
24-70 f2.
I want to
For
say
Canon?
RF.
Yeah,
I think.
Yes, they do.
Right. So there's some very unique specialty lenses that can push you to the even shallower look. But the 2.8 on full frame is plenty shallow for most purposes.
They released, was it Tamron who made it first, and Sigma, and everyone's making it, but it's a 35 to 150 f2 to a 2.8,
Right.
I believe, which I've used that lens on Sony, and that's probably my favorite lens because it's not like wide. A 35 is wide, but it's not wide.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about. But it's wide enough where you're like, okay, yeah, like I get a sense of, where I'm at, but then being able to punch into 150 at like a 2.8, super shallow at that focal distance, and it looks just magnificent. Like the bokeh on that lens, I think is really, really nice, especially for that range you get for one lens. It's like, I think that's like the ultimate like docu style lens. Granted, no stabilization, but the way I shoot, it's a lot more lockdown.
Yeah. Handheld.
Lockdown, so it's like slight movement.
And I think the one thing people often, we're talking about Micro Four Thirds, full frame, all these things. Micro Four Thirds, I think, is still a great system because when you even compare them side by side, I sent you some test shots between the S5 Mark II and the G9 Mark II, and like there's some differences, but they're also like
not that you can tell on a phone. That's for sure.
Like you can see that they're a little different, but you're like, yeah, but they like look the same.
Yeah. If you were to see it on a monitor, like what we were talking about earlier, you could tell just by looking in like the bokeh and like the out of focus parts of the image. Like you could see that noise that we're kind of talking about. But again, it's not like grainy noise. It's just the texture of what a Micro Four Thirds, sensor looks like when it's blown up.
Yeah.
But looking on your phone, you can't tell. It looks great. So,
and it's almost interesting because there's this weird inversion that's happened. It used to be back in the day, full frame was expensive. It had the expensive camera bodies, it had the expensive lenses. Everything full frame was expensive. And Micro Four Thirds was smaller, cheaper. The bodies were cheaper, the lenses were cheaper, and everything was small, lightweight. And so it was this inversion though has happened where full frame has gotten so cheap. The bodies, like I was saying, like you can find full frame bodies for like $1,000. Probably sub 1,000 if they're a little bit older. The lenses from Sigma, especially Tamron, like you mentioned, Samyang, they're making full frame glass that's really good, really sharp, really crispy, really affordable.
Dude, there's so many lenses. Like I never got rid of my Rokinon EF lenses. I still use. I just used them recently. The sharpest lenses. I was like, geez, I'm so glad I never got rid of these.
Right. So you got the full frame stuff that's becoming more and more affordable. Whereas to compete with Micro Four Thirds, not only do you have to spend a good chunk of money on like something like a GH7, which is expensive out the gate, but you also need to buy the most expensive lenses for that system to even come close to the cheap full frame stuff. Granted, full frame has really expensive glass as well. The thousands upon thousands of dollars you can invest in glass, but it's just that inversion has happened where Micro Four Thirds, the bodies are not smaller, they're not cheaper.
Literally the same body.
Same body. They're not smaller, they're not cheaper, and the glass to compete, you have to buy the top tier Leica 10 to 25. And there was a point where that made sense. And now I feel like the tables have turned a little bit where I'm like, well now I'm not going to, I'm going to get a full frame body and a lens for cheaper than the GH7 Micro Four Thirds body only.
Yeah.
So why wouldn't I just do this over here?
Well, what was the lens that they came out with? Was it the 150 to 300 or something like that? It was a lens that was a full frame lens that they just were like, oh yeah, it's a Micro Four Thirds lens now.
Oh,
like Olympus. What was that lens?
Gosh, what I forget the
because that was the one where
range.
Everyone was like, this looks oddly familiar. It's the same lens. They just rehoused it. So it's like, why would you pay more for that lens? It's like, granted, it's like, oh yeah, it works seamlessly, all that jazz, but also it's like, why wouldn't I just get a full frame body then that's cheaper and then buy that full frame lens, which is also cheaper, and get all the benefits of full frame?
Right. Which there are some, they're kind of that 1% range where it's like, I want it a little cleaner, a little more dynamic range, a little bit. And I could make the case for Micro Four Thirds for so long until now. And unless they change something by adding either more features or lowering the price point, what incentive is there to go with a system that just inherently costs you more to get the same result?
I think the final straw of me like kind of noticing that was that big lens, because the draw for Micro Four Thirds is smaller lenses. Mm-hmm. It's like that's the same lens. It's a full frame lens. It's huge.
Yeah,
but I don't know. It's
and these companies, they're going to cater to whatever the market demands, and the market has gone towards full frame. Shallow depth of field is very attractive. A lot of people like it. Almost every show nowadays, talking about like The Bear or The Boys or House of the Dragon I've been watching, they're all so shallow. It's these like just everything's out of focus except for the one little thing you're looking at. And that is
it's probably good because everyone's shooting on like LED walls now. It's like LED sound stages.
Sure, like, hides a lot.
Yeah. It's like you don't want to be able to see all that. Yeah.
So I don't know. I'm really happy with the S5 Mark II, although I would say the value to upgrade, if you already have something you're happy with, it's there. It gives me the features I want. The autofocus is good. It's not quite as good as the Sony autofocus. I think everyone kind of knows that, but I'll just reaffirm.
Yeah.
The autofocus works great for video, for photo. It's good as well. I can't say it's bad, but there's like the Sony autofocus is so good. When we did that photo shoot, every one of those shots, that the eyeball is in the part of the eye that you want, not the eyelash, like the iris in focus almost all the time. Yeah. And that's on I was shooting on an A7R3. So that's even like generations old now. So the Sony stuff, the autofocus, there's still nothing that competes quite to that level, but there's things that the Lumix cameras do that the Sonys don't. The open gate, shutter angle, some of those things we were talking about. S5 Mark II had some interesting features. I'm forgetting them off the top of my head, but I was going through the menu and I was like, oh, that's kind of neat that you can change that. That's kind of neat. I forget exactly what it was, but there's some customization that kind of popped out as unexpected. I played around with the real-time LUT. We could talk about that if you want.
Yeah. Does it have the only feature I really want on any of those cameras? And I'm sure I've said this before, but false color would be like ideally the one thing I'd want to add.
I don't think so,
because I know you can add like waveforms is nice, but even then it's just like ideally. But whatever.
Yeah, I tried so I was saying theoretically you can convert Vlog to ARRI C-Log in camera using real-time LUT, so log-to-log conversion in camera, and then take your ARRI LUTs after the fact and color it that way. That does work 99% of the time. There was some really weird instance though where, you know how like sometimes these cameras will do like vignette compensation. It like activated or just deactivated for like one frame. Whoa. It was very bizarre where it was just kind of like a pop of a vignette. And I don't know if that was the culprit, but that's the only thing I can attribute it to. I have to go check the settings. But
was that just in like the beginning of the
no, it was randomly like it was like halfway through a clip. It just just like a weird kind of like the vignette went away and then it came back.
Interesting.
And I thought it was maybe like a color correction issue in post. I don't know what it was. It's just a weird
bump the lens maybe.
Where I'm just kind of like, I don't know. And to do that log to log conversion real time presents some challenges when you're using an external monitor, because you have to load the LUT for that. But then if I switch to my photo mode, which is not log, now all of a sudden my monitor has this LUT applied to Rec 709 footage. And so there's a lot of things to keep track of, and I probably will just go back to Vlog.
Because if you were doing that on the GH7, it would be easier?
Yeah, because the nice thing about those Lumix cameras is they have the LUT assist built in.
That's right.
And so I'm assuming, I haven't tested it, but on the GH7, I would hope that they have a ARRI log assist as well.
I would assume so.
So that's how I always run those Lumix cameras. I just shoot them Vlog, and the HDMI and the monitor have the LUT assist on, but I'm not baking anything in. I'm shooting log. I'm viewing with a LUT assist. So I just run that over the HDMI, and the monitor is just getting a feed from the camera. So if I switch to standard, if I switch to Cinelike V, the monitor doesn't care. It's always getting something that's Rec 709-ish. Yeah. The moment you're loading LUTs into the monitor, now you're applying that LUT to whatever gets sent. And so if you change your camera profile from log to Rec 709 or whatever it might be, you're constantly managing these LUTs and these different files all over the place. And you're kind of like, this is tedious. I don't want to have to think about it that much. I'd rather just shoot Vlog probably with the LUT assist, because the difference between Vlog and C-Log, they're minor.
Yeah,
They're
and I've
really
seen
minor.
a lot of people get pretty close just
Yeah.
by tweaking the colors. So I don't know if it's that valuable.
I will plug that plugin again. And they're not a sponsor. I don't know who they are. The Cinematch. Really, really useful plugin for Premiere, for Resolve, basically to match your cameras. And that does most of the work for you. So if you're shooting with GoPros and with DJI drones and Osmos and Lumix and Sony, that's about the best solution I've found as far as truly, not just eyeball matching or having to shoot a bunch of color charts. You just say, convert this to that, convert this to that, convert this to that, and it
ideally
does
that'd
most
be
of it for you.
Best way to do it for every camera.
Just to convert what?
Just anything like that. Like, I like that idea of just going from like log to log, not trying to figure out like, okay, this is log converted to 709. This is 709 now. Let me match.
Get a
it.
match.
Like,
Yeah.
that's difficult.
Yeah, I was even playing around with those phantom LUTs that I know are very popular, and I believe his approach is just airy log, just convert everything, kind of, that's your base.
Yeah.
And that works for a lot of people. For me, it's been Vlog for the most part, where I've converted DJI stuff to Vlog. And you can go any which direction, so it doesn't
And
really
that's
matter.
D-log.
D-Log.
To Vlog. Okay.
Yeah, gosh. They're...
D-log.
Because Arri is C-Log, but I think Canon is C-Log too. It must be, right? S-Log is Sony.
I've never used Canons, but
L-Log.
that would make sense.
L-Log is nothing. Is there L-Log?
It should be Lumix.
It should be, but they have V-Log.
Vlog.
For Varicam, which I haven't heard much about recently. N-Log. F-Log is Fuji. I don't know if there's O-Log for Olympus.
O-Log.
Maybe they just use V-Log too. I don't know. I haven't tested every camera. But yeah, there's so many SKUs now. And I don't even know if Blackmagic has a log profile. They just call it film.
Raw.
Yeah, just raw or film was their look. But I'm very happy with the S5 Mark II.
B-Raw. Is that what they call it?
B-Raw, yes.
B-Raw.
Which you can shoot now. I think a few of the Lumix cameras allow you to shoot B-Raw if you have one of those video assist monitors. I've never done that, but I'm also not big into like raw, massive file sizes either.
I don't know. We'll see about getting into DaVinci.
No, I will not see.
Yeah, dude. Dude, Adobe's messing up.
Yeah.
They're dropping the ball. I don't know how Adobe could possibly let down the most loyal fan base of all time.
I mean, give them some heat, like make them feel it.
For sure.
If you can afford to cancel,
hilarious.
if you can afford to switch, go to Resolve. And then that just makes it, hopefully, Adobe's like, oh, man, we got to figure this out. And I'll just sit back and go like, thanks for the features, Adobe. Thank you.
I'm still waiting for them to do what they promised 10 plus years ago.
What's that?
They were just going to update their
They'll never
cloud.
Do that. They'll never do
You're
that.
going to have one program and we'll just constantly update it. It'll never have any issues. No. And then immediately they were like, well, we'll just have you download 20 different premieres over time.
They have made Lumetri quite a bit better. Remember when we used to use SpeedGrade?
When it was, SpeedGrade.
And then it was like, Lumetri, there's a new way. And we're like, this doesn't have the features I need. They've kind of got the features now.
Better. I do like the idea of nodes. I don't know if they'll ever get into that. Because nodes very convenient because it's, like working with layers essentially. Like I like that idea. So it's not just all like on one effect or whatever. I know we have our way of doing it by having like an adjustment layer, more global, but I like the idea of being able to like push footage more so. So we'll see if Premiere ever gets around.
I think it does. It does most of what I needed to, and it certainly has. There have been ups and downs with how well it has performed on different Mac operating systems. But I think right now, for the most part, everything's working well. It's working as intended. Nothing's taking an absurd amount of time.
No.
Playback is pretty snappy. They've made some recent updates that have kind of matched. I feel like they struggled there a bit to find their footing. Adobe and Apple.
Yes.
Apple was doing like M1, M2, M3, and Adobe was like, Premiere sucks now.
Yeah,
just clear your cache, reinstall
every iteration.
But
seems to have
now
some
it's a
kind of
little bit more stable than it once was, maybe 2 years ago.
Yeah, I think it's just because we haven't upgraded our cameras in so long. The computers have kept getting better and better and better.
I don't know.
Software.
Yeah, And then every once in a while you run into someone being like, "What'd you shoot this with? I can't edit it." It's
Right.
It was a GH5. Like,
Oh, yeah.
they're regular.
Yeah, it was that proxy issue that I was telling you about. The
Yeah,
GH6
yeah,
had the proxy
yeah.
issue with the multiple channels
That
of
is
audio.
That is one thing I wish Lumix would fix on their cameras. They've implemented this 4-channel audio on all their new cameras, I believe. I don't know much about the S9. That's the compact full frame. I don't know how that one works. I assume it's probably similar just because it's all they all share the same features nowadays. But the S5 Mark II, the G9 Mark II, the GH6, the GH7 now, 4-channel audio, 4 tracks of audio. Channels 3 and 4 have nothing on them. Even if you plug a microphone in, it doesn't use the internal mic to like fill those tracks in. So I would wager 90% of the time I'm recording 4 channels of audio and
For
2 of
just
them
one.
are wasted. And it'd be fine. It'd be fine if they just said the moment you plug in a microphone, the internal mic goes to 3 and 4.
Yeah, that would make sense.
And they still have not figured this out. I hope someone at Lumix finally listens to this, sees a video. I don't know.
Yeah.
But that'd be a really nice feature to actually use
Yeah.
the internal mics when you plug in a mic and actually fill out those. But they want you to buy that $500 adapter. Oh, you want 4 channels of audio? Get this edition. That's the other reason it kind of
Chaps your whiskers.
the solution of it reminds me of back in the day. You remember Sega Genesis? You remember Super Nintendo? You remember?
Yes.
Oh, you want Rumble? Buy this Rumble pack. Oh, you want to play CDs? Buy the Sega CD. Oh, you want 32-bit? Buy the 32X expander.
Very Apple with their dongles.
It's the dongle thing. It's the buying the accessories for that are kind of now. Granted, the XLR adapter does work on multiple cameras, so I can't criticize them too much. But I don't like the idea of having to buy additional parts to supplement the feature. So I would take this back to the GH6, end of life now, but they had some partnership with DJI and that LiDAR adapter. So I get it. It shoots the light beams out that you can't see infrared or however it works, but you need the whole gimbal to even make that work.
Yeah.
So to get autofocusing, LiDAR autofocusing on a GH6, not only do you need to spend another $1,500, but you need to put the LiDAR module on the top, and you have to film with a gimbal, which that's not our style.
No.
I don't want to have extra weight, extra junk, extra batteries to charge. I want everything in the camera. So it's kind of, I don't know, short-sighted to offload features to third-party accessories or just external accessories.
Yeah.
Just to get the most out of these things. Just put more of it in.
But then you'd get the people saying the opposite. Well, I don't need those features. Why are you making it so expensive? Just take those out. I'd rather just buy a separate audio device.
Well, that's a little silly, I think.
Right.
I look at something like the S5 Mark II. I would rather have a $1,300 S5 Mark II that does the $1,300 does all the autofocusing, internal, phase detect, all of it versus spending $1,500 to get the features and more bulk on a GH6.
It is funny because I don't know any other camera manufacturer that did do it, but Panasonic already did that with like the GH5S. Was it where they took out the stabilization?
Stabilization, yep.
So it's like they
Change the sensor.
I don't know if that was like on purpose specifically because they were like, well, people already have gimbals. We're just going to put other features, other video features in here. You don't need a stabilizer. You're going to put it on your gimbal. So like I get kind of where that
at that time
train
I
of
think
thought was
sort of
going.
made sense, yeah.
But even nowadays when they're like, well, I'm giving you a camera that has all of these features. But if you want the extra stuff, obviously you're going to have to add that on. Because if you're buying a Micro Four Thirds camera, I don't think a normal person is going to be like, why doesn't this have XLRs built in? Because like, why would you?
No, I don't want XLR is not it. It's the 32-bit float.
Well, yeah, I mean,
that should be an internal feature. You should be able to do that with any microphone plugged in. And XLR
maybe, yeah,
is because you want to use XLR. And that's a fair, people have their needs and you need this special box to plug in XLR. Fair enough. You're going to have to do that anyway with a Tascam or a Zoom, Zoom H4n or whatever. What are they on now? I don't know. The Zoom kind of like fell out of favor.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't kept up with them since I got that. the XLR plug-in device.
Yeah,
because I was using
all you need it for.
what we're using, the Tascam, the DR something, those little recorders, the Tascams. It was the
Oh, yeah.
DR12s or something like that.
10? Gosh, what was the name of those?
DR something L.
Yeah, they're like the
10L,
wedding
12,
mics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those had like obviously like they could record on themselves. That was fine. And then obviously they came out with the other recorders that had built-in 32-bit float. I think Zoom came out with those recorders. And then now it's just built into the camera, kind of. It's built into the device on top of the camera. Eventually, I'm sure it'll get to just internally.
Which will just be like finally having log profiles. For the longest time, we didn't have log profiles on any cameras. And then they were like, okay, I forget who was first. Sony was early to the game with S-Log. Canon had Canon log early on, I want to say, on some of their cameras. But now every camera has it, which is finally where it's like a nice place. You don't have to like check the specs just to make, can I do 422 10-bit? Yeah. They all can do it now. Most of them don't have record limits.
Yeah, a lot of entry-level cameras I see are starting out with 10-bit color now. I was like, holy schmoligans, which is cool. I like it.
Yeah, that DJI Osmo Pocket 3, 10-bit. Like, great.
Sweet.
Thank you.
But then it's going to be 12-bit, 15. Keep getting better and better, more.
Yeah, you got to upgrade your computer again. So, I don't know. I think that's it for the S5 Mark II. I think it's...
well, when's the perceived upgrade, I guess, for their full frame line? Because that camera is a year old at this point.
I want to say about a year old. And that's the second version. So there was an S5.
Yep.
Then they did the S5 Mark II, which just basically included phase detect and a few other features. There's the S5 Mark II X.
The blacked out
even
camera.
More video features. And you know what? I haven't even updated the firmware in my S5 Mark II. So I probably could do that and get some of the newer stuff, the camera to cloud and those kind of interesting things. The S9 just came out. That's the compact. Really cool. I actually think that's very tempting for what it is. If I was doing travel a lot, I would probably pick one of those up just to kind of have with me. The flip side is the S1. That's the oldest and the kind of longest lasting, where it's definitely time for an upgrade for the S1, the S1R, and the S1H. And I know people are really, really excited for like an S1H Mark II. But I don't know if that.
That's what I'm interested to see. If they have any like game-changing features for their next newest iteration. I don't know what it'd be. Maybe internal 32-bit flow. Who knows?
You really gotta stack the deck in your favor these days with those features.
Yeah, I don't know what else they could add.
It is a problem when you make things good enough and people get used to you. You're like, okay, I'll just deal with the limitations. This was the problem that Canon had for a long time, and maybe they still have to this very day. They made DSLRs good enough. We struggled with Moray. We struggled with 1080 only, and it was like mushy 1080. It wasn't even true 1080, right? We made videos probably a decade ago about this kind of stuff. Audio inputs, some of them didn't even have 24 frames a second. There was all these, you were handicapped in a lot of ways if you shot that, but it was cheap enough and it did most of the stuff well enough that when people were using them, it's like, yeah, I'm pretty happy with my 5D Mark II.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, how do we get you to buy a, what is it, like a C500 or, their high-end, $20,000 camera line.
Put XLRs into it.
It's got XLRs and NDs. And you're like, I'm good with my 5D Mark II, or I'm good with my 7D or my 60D. Yeah. People adjust, even us back in the day on the GH4. And we were like nesting, because they would record in like 4-minute clips. So the GH4 could record continuous, but in 4-minute clips because of the fat 32 architecture. So we would just drop them all on a timeline, nest them all, and we're like, hey, we got one continuous clip now. Great. And even on the GH1, it was like struggling with these weird MTS files, hacking the thing, and you make do with what you have. And then by the time the thing comes out that's like, hey, do you want this new GH7? It's got all these great features. You're like, I'm kind of set.
Yeah, well set, actually.
I'm set. I'm with this G9 Mark II. I just had to white it out and clip a fan to the back from time to time. But like, I'm good.
Yeah.
But don't you want the new thing? It's twice as expensive. Well, does it do anything else? Well, it can do 32-bit float audio. If you buy the 500, it's more expensive. Oh, no, I'm good. I'm good.
I feel like if they did a better, like a trade-in program, you know, like if they did
nice.
another one of those, I feel like more people would be like, okay, I'm willing to like trade in my old stuff to get, you know, this new version. But to buy it again kind of sucks. Yeah. Like when I have something that's so similar that I'm just like, it's literally just like one feature that I don't have on this camera, which is it even going to make what I do even better? Like how often are people yelling into the microphone, you know?
Yeah, it's that Apple mentality of we need to come up with a new iPhone every year, and so we're just going to increase the features just a little bit, a little bit. But I actually prefer the phenomenon that we've discovered with your Lumix GX9 in that they made a perfect camera.
That camera, why is it perfect?
It checks all the boxes you would ever want it to. And that camera has held its value. If you go look to go buy a GX9 to this very day, they're still quite expensive. They didn't make an awful lot of them. They discontinued them pretty quick, but it's small, it's compact, micro four thirds.
The 8 is still around.
Yeah. But the 9, I think there's, what's the difference?
It has a flash, built-in flash.
The 8 doesn't have the flash?
I don't think so.
See? So they put the flash in there, and that's what you want.
That's what I specifically was looking for. But
that camera, the people who bought that camera and know the value really like it.
Yeah.
Same thing with the GH5S, the people who bought that camera for, you know, so you don't have to sell the most of anything, but as long as you make something that kind of is the, I don't know, the best that it can be. Put as much into it as possible. Don't just try and give me this like marginal update because you're saving the rest of the updates for the GH8, which at this point probably won't come.
Yeah, no.
I
kind
of feel like it's the GH7 is probably the last.
Yeah, and there's something to be said about, like we're talking about the noise of, you know, micro four thirds sensor, and I think the GX9, like of the photos that I shoot with it, that's kind of like it's vintage, but it's not that vintage. So it looks like it's like, okay, this is dated. It has the on-camera flash, which is something that I was specifically looking for. I was looking for a small camera that I could just do like BTS on-set kind of thing, something that could literally fit in your pocket. And that's something that a lot of full frame cameras don't have, is that on-camera flash. And I know that style is like kind of like it's coming back around. It's very, very hip. So yeah, I was just looking for like a pancake lens. I finally found a 7 Artisans. I think it's like an 18mm lens, manual focus, but it's really, really sharp. And I've kind of like memorized like the different focus points on that lens, because ideally it's something that you just take out and shoot. You don't really have to think or like focus. But I was telling you the Dispo lens. Have you seen that on Instagram, like advertised? It's a lens that like one of those plastic lenses. I believe it's plastic lens that they take out of like the disposable cameras, and they 3D print the mount so it can go full frame micro four thirds. I did buy it for micro four thirds, thinking I was like, oh yeah, this is gonna be great. I don't have to focus at all. But it turns out, I guess it's a 28mm equivalent, like full frame lens. So on the micro four thirds, it's about a 50mm, and then the minimum focus distance is like, 20 feet away. So I was like, this is actually terrible for micro four thirds. So I got to send that back. But maybe for full frame, it'll be better. But I haven't personally found any newer full frame cameras, like point and shoot kind of cameras that have built-in flash. Like even like the most compact Sony cameras, the mirrorless ones don't have built-in flash, so which is fine. But if you're going for that look and you don't want to have like an external flash, it's kind of difficult. But they are making more like retro kind of cameras that aren't the big name brand. So
yeah, we're finally reaching that point where I'm starting to see people on Instagram, people on YouTube, wherever it might be, younger people. Oh, I converted my old camcorder to shoot HD, or I can stream with my...
Yeah, they're shooting like camcorder to SD, like going from like composite to SD, basically. SD cards. Like they're shooting on SD cards, but from like component, like figuring out a way to do that.
Which is fun. I love that kind of mentality. Yeah. It's definitely a gimmick. It's a novelty, but there is always a hybrid, a balance between the two. You don't need the super expensive latest and greatest, and it's not practical to shoot on really old stuff, but every once in a while you'll find something that kind of checks both boxes.
Yeah. For me personally, the only reason I got it, and this was even before like the trend was taking place of like the front flash feel, I just wanted that because I was like, well, I think it'd be convenient to have a flash on the camera. But more so, I was going for that manual, taking a photo manual. Like, that's what I was going for. I was like, because I miss, it's like spending the time to actually dial in a photo of like, yes, very intentionally, this is what I want in focus. So like, it takes more time and more intention to take one shot versus obviously of an iPhone. Everything's auto. You just press the button and it snaps it.
Yeah, you got to every time you take a photo on a smartphone, you got to take like 3 or 4.
Yeah, and if you really want it to be intentional, you have to really like press and hold, adjust the exposure, all this stuff.
So slow.
But like that's not what it's for. A phone camera is supposed to be automatic, but I like the more intentional, like, okay, I have this camera that is very manual, that I'm intentionally putting it in manual, trying to figure out my exact composition and everything. But I don't know. I like the trend of people finding older technology, vintage stuff, making it work. Which I'm like we're talking about before. I like the fact that I kept my old lenses. Like those still work very well, and until they don't, who knows? It'll get to a point where we're not using physical lenses. Maybe one day, who knows?
There's always the weird stuff that stays relevant or comes back around, and people all of a sudden want again. Mm-hmm. And it's just the stuff that was popular then becomes popular again 30 years later.
No, but I mean, even for me, I just love the idea of adapting things because I love throwing my the longest lens I have on my smallest sensor camera just for S's and G's. It's like, let's see if I can take a photo of this moon tonight, just because and then I make a telescope out of all my different adapters. But I don't know. Like that's always the fun part. Mm-hmm. Grip gear, also fun. This is about fun. This is fun.
It is fun, and especially when you can get a lot of value out of the purchase, out of the investment. Yeah. Spend a little bit of everything costs some amount, and some things cost more for good reason, and other things.
It's actually the one thing I told you. You were like, you're gonna get the like a full frame Lumix, and I was like, well, I feel like I gotta offload some equipment before I really get into buying new stuff again. Yeah. Because I just keep looking at my my closet, and I'm just like, geez, Louise.
About to be a museum.
Yeah, honestly, I'm like, at this point, I should probably just go full in, be like, I need to make a display case and just have like, this should just be art at this moment. Because there's a certain moment where it costs more to try to sell something. Because your time and effort of like posting, getting back to people, mailing it, it's like, how much is your time worth to sell it versus like if I just put it on display, it might be better used as like an art piece for me personally, and also like having the memories of like that used to be my favorite, like 18-35 right there, man. It's like, oh man, like Canon EF 7200 battle scars. That thing, oh man, that thing is weathered. I don't think I'd ever sell that actually.
The EF stuff is still relevant because almost every one of the mirrorless cameras has adapters now. Mm-hmm. That all seem to work pretty well. Yeah. So there's still a good use for that, and it's certainly a good investment, perhaps. If you are trying to save a little bit of money, pick up some old... I definitely recommend get like a native lens for whatever system you're going for. Sony, Lumix, Nikon, doesn't matter. Get some native lens.
Anything native will just prevent so many headaches. Like I know people try to like save money by being like, you know what, I'll just get this lens a little bit cheaper and an adapter. Not worth it. Just if you're gonna use this lens to make money, get the native glass.
Yes, but when you're starting
out. You're starting out, yeah.
And you're trying to
stop looking at expensive glass then if you're just starting out.
That's probably true. But I would say
you need the nifty 50 if you're starting it out.
For the value, I can't really think of anything better than the Lumix S5 Mark II right now.
Currently, yeah, and it gives you the most versatility.
It gives you
open gate. So
yeah, there's the price is right. The L mount lenses
are not expensive.
No, and there's enough of them.
Sony and everything. Yeah, you have all the primes that you'd ever need.
Yep.
I think they're the fastest, like a 1.8, but that's ultra fast for video. Like you don't.
Well, that's the Panasonic ones. If you go, Sigma has 1.2s.
Oh, okay, yeah. Oh, yeah. I was just talking about native.
Which Panasonic could do better with more like native, like first party lenses. But Sigma has great lenses. Tamron has finally started making good lenses. Samyang. So the L mount has a
have
good
limitations? Because I know Sony, for instance, if you have a third party Sigma lens for Sony, there's some features that it won't allow you to do, like shooting like high burst rate.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
I don't know if. Okay.
I'm not sure. I got to imagine. I hope not, but it could be. I think. I believe Sigma is part of the L mount alliance. So whatever that means, contractually behind the scenes, they make lenses for L mount, and I would hope that they play nice with like native, Panasonic, and whoever else is in it. I think, yeah, because even Sigma makes their own cameras now.
Yeah, it's true.
So I think if you're a Canon shooter, you're going to shoot Canon. If you're Nikon, you're going to shoot Nikon. It's kind of everyone else that's on the fringes that's probably bounces back and forth a little bit more. And I know there's a lot of people happy with the S5 Mark II, and now I'm one of them.
Yeah, if I was just getting into video and photo, I would get into the full frame Lumix line for sure.
Yeah, that or Sony. If you had you could sway me.
If it was Sony though, I feel like you would have to like. You're either going to be a photographer or you're going into video, because Sony, it's very kind of difficult because like the video centric cameras, very expensive. They're photo centric cameras, like the R series for photography, very expensive, $3,000-$4,000 bodies. And then same thing with video. Like if you're going the S route, or if you're getting like the more like cinema line, they're starting out like around 4,000 and up. So you kind of really have to decide. You get the middle of the road camera like the A7 IVs, I guess.
Yeah.
But then you're not really getting the pro video features or the pro photo features. So it's like, that's why I would go with Lumix. Like if you're going to do both, I would say go there, because then the open gate, you have so many more options for creating video content. And then you're also going to get the benefits of that for photography as well. Because even for photography, we shoot 4x3 on the Micro Four Thirds, and that gives us a lot of leeway when it comes to cropping. So
yeah, for time lapses or anything like that. I think if I were going to do Sony, I would probably get an FX3 or an FX30.
I know people who've gotten the FX30 and they're not stoked on the noise.
Really?
Especially when they're matching it to their FX3s. So take that for what it's worth. But
yeah, but if you're a solo shooter and you're buying something,
yeah,
you might be like okay with it. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, if it's like your B camera and only going to, social media content.
Yeah.
But if you're going to be watching it larger, I would probably stay away from it.
Let me look up. I got to see what those FX3s cost now, because they've been out for an enough time.
I want to say they're like still around like 4,000 ish.
Used. I was going to look it up. It's always the kind of thing. Like, just see what it goes for used. Yeah, like 3,700 new. Let's pull it up here on the used. Amazon used 3,400. Yeah.
Which even with this camera, no viewfinder.
True.
So that's one thing kind of got away, because this is the same sensor with the A7S III. It just has different features. It's a little bit better, obviously, if you're going to go the video route, specifically because there's specific buttons all over it that are video centric. Your ISO, white balance, all that stuff. But if you're going to be like, if you want to be low profile, go with the A7S III, because you can just keep it at like its core camera body and then look through the viewfinder, which I find very helpful. But if you're going to build it out, then the FX3 is a way better way to go.
Yeah. Sony always seems like they kind of have the best features when it comes to autofocus. And just that kind of, we've talked about it before, they're the most popular. So they kind of, not that like you buy something because it's popular, but because it's popular, you're almost drawn to it because you can be more compatible if you're filming alongside someone.
There's a lot more questions that are answered, that's for sure. Like if you're looking for an answer, there's a lot more people that have talked about it too. Like because it's more popular camera.
There's more help to be found, and it's easier to plug in if someone says, "Yeah, I want to hire you. What camera package do you have?" Right. "Oh, I've got a Sony FX whatever."
You fit into their ecosystem.
They go, "Oh, great. We're shooting Sony over here. So yeah, come on board." Versus if you're like, "Well, I have Lumix," and they're like, Oh, gosh. Ugh.
Yeah, that's
And
happened to me
then
before.
inevitably they look at the footage like, this looks great.
Yeah.
They're always happy with it, but it's just the brand
Well,
value.
they're also like so confused. How do I grade it? It's
Yeah.
like, well, you put the LUT on there.
Yeah, it's easy.
Probably the same way you'd grade other stuff. Pretty similar.
Yeah, but that's the kind of trap with the Sony cameras is that the affordable ones have enough irritations that you're always swayed to get the more expensive ones, and then all of a sudden you blow your budget. So that's why I don't know. I just always
Just rent.
fall
Just
back to
rent.
Lumix. It's just such a good value. It's all the features you could ever want. Reliable. I mean, it might not be the best at autofocus, but it's certainly great at a bunch of other stuff.
Yeah.
And it is good at autofocus now. It's good. They're all good.
I'd believe it. Haven't used it, but I believe it.
Just take my word for it.
Yeah, I'll take your word for it.
Yeah. I don't know if I have any other thoughts on it other than I'm pretty happy. I'm glad that Sigma lens performs as well as it does because it is sharp.
Yeah.
You know, enough to where I'm like, okay, I'm not losing anything by using this. Aside from the wider focal lengths, but again, it's like not a huge deal.
Yeah. Less cinematic. The wider the focal length, nah.
Yeah, but sometimes I want. Yeah. But there's nothing that stops me from like using
No.
micro four thirds. I can still do it.
Yeah, I think the wide, the 20 millimeter equivalent, you know, full frame, that look, like I've always liked the micro four thirds shooting that wide on a micro four thirds because you can still get pretty close focus, which you can't do, or it's a lot more difficult to do with a full frame. So that's one thing where, yes, close up wide angle lens, micro four thirds, much easier to achieve that look. So I don't know if anyone out there is trying to get that look of a close-up wide-angle lens. I really love it. And a lot of the social media content we've shot, it's a lot easier to show more, you know, on social media in a vertical
yeah.
with that wide angle. And like, especially if you're going to get something close-up wide angle, it's a very unique look that, again, you can't really get on full frame, or at least it's very difficult unless you have like something like a diopter or something like that. But yeah, good times. I'm excited to see again the next iteration of the full frame Lumix, because I don't know what other features they could add. So like that's what I'm kind of excited to see. It's like, okay, well, maybe the 32-bit float, sure, but what else?
What else?
Hopefully the NDs.